Joining us right now from Washington, Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey. Senator, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria. Thanks for having me.
Your reaction to the news?
You know, it's two things, Maria, to be honest. On one level, it's just appalling that we have so many instances of powerful men using their position of power to intimidate, coerce, and exploit and harass women who are in their workplace. On the other hand, I'm glad that women feel they can come forward because this has to end. It's really appalling.
Well, people want to know what's going on in Congress, by the way, about, paying for sexual misconduct and with taxpayer money just to shut people up. What's the story there, sir?
That's completely unacceptable. I had no idea any such thing even occurred. I don't know how it could occur. But to the extent that it does, it's completely unacceptable and it has to end. So we've got to figure out how this is done so that we can prevent it from happening.
So in other words, you're working on ways to end that you will not be using taxpayer money to shut people down from speaking about sexual misconduct.
I will be happy to vigorously support making it impossible for somebody to use taxpayer money for purposes like that.
All right, speaking of taxpayer money, Senator, we got to get to the tax story right now. Can you give us a sense of where this stands right now in terms of getting a bill to the floor for a vote this week?
We had a big step forward yesterday. As you know, the Budget Committee passed our measure. This is a necessary step to bringing this to the floor, and we can do that. I think today, as early as today, we might very well have a procedural vote which will allow us to begin consideration on the Senate floor of the bill. As you may know, under the Senate rules, it'll be open to unlimited amendments. So we expect that there will be many amendments, constructive and some meant to tear the bill down. We'll have to deal with them. But I think we're on a path to getting this done. We've been meeting very long marathon meetings with the folks who've raised the genuine concerns that they have on our side. I think we're finding ways to address those concerns, so I think we're going to get there.
Yeah, okay, so you're going to get there, but at what cost? We've been talking this morning about the trigger that was implemented or put into this bill as a result of what Bob Corker wanted. And Dagan, this is something that we were complaining about because it basically says that tax rates are going to go up in 6 years if you don't see the kind of growth that you guys are predicting. Isn't that right, Dagan?
Right, and as you pointed out, Maria, there are other triggers. We're talking about the individual tax cuts go away anyway in 2025. There's a 10-year window on this. And 6 years out, if you have a tax increase put in place to appease the likes of Bob Corker, Congressman, what if the economy is in a recession and that's the reason revenue declines? Would you vote for something that has this tax increase trigger in it?
So the bill that came out of the Senate Finance Committee, on which I sit, did not have any triggers. I don't like the idea of putting in triggers based on revenue, but I like the idea of passing legislation. And so we've got a provision that we're going to work out the details. It'll take a look 6 years from now and determine whether or not we are at the revenue projections that we are making today based on the current policy of the federal government. I certainly hope and I believe we'll be exceeding those revenue levels, in which case no change happens. If, however, the revenue is below the target, then we will have to implement at that point, 7 years from now, some kind of tax increase that'll generate a certain amount of revenue over the next 10 years. I don't think this is optimal, but look, there's lots in this bill that I don't think is optimal. Getting the corporate rate to 20%, fixing our international system, a big discount for pass-throughs, lowering rates for middle-income folks. There's an awful lot that's good in the bill.
Senator, go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. So moving a little to the left side here, just two questions. I'd be curious where you stand. Where do you stand on the CHIP program? And where do you stand on DACA? Are you supportive of proceeding on the Children's Insurance Program as well as the Dreamers Act?
I think there's overwhelming support. We'll restore CHIP at some point soon. I think in most states, I think the clock runs out in January sometime. I think it'll probably happen in December. On DACA, I think it's a little bit complicated. I think there are other aspects that we ought to deal with. If we are going to, which I suspect we will, I think we all feel very sympathetic to folks who were brought to this country as young children, for instance. But if you do grant a legal status and amnesty to those folks, which many of us could support, you have to acknowledge that it also encourages other people to do likewise, to bring their undocumented kids. It could invite a flood of new illegal immigration. So we should deal with some of the consequences of that, and I think it should all be dealt with in a package.
Yeah. Bob Nardelli?
Senator Bob Nardelli here. I'm really encouraged with the positive side of what you've talked about relative to this new tax bill. I think it's very encouraging and certainly will help stimulate the economy. And it's going to require a vote on party line for sure. I think you would agree with that. I just don't understand, and I'm sure a lot of the public out there doesn't understand why a senator would throw something in, a wrench, to try and derail this thing, and then is not even going to be in the Senate to live up to what he's proposed.
Well, okay, I think you're alluding to my colleague Senator Corker on this. In fairness to Senator Corker, I think he always wanted to get to yes. I think he's always wanted to be able to support this. He supports very much the pro-growth provisions on the business side. But, you know, he's got concerns about whether or not we're going to have the revenue that we're projecting. I think you should ask him about how he views that trade-off. In my mind, I think you don't create any uncertainty. Ideally, you have these low rates. Allowing the full expensing of all capital expenditures is very pro-growth.
Yeah.
But, hey, this is an exercise of holding at least 50 out of 52 Republican senators because, as you pointed out correctly, Democrats won't be giving us votes if we're stuck at 49. If we don't have the votes, they won't let this happen. If we do have the votes, if we've got the 50 or 52 votes on the Senate floor, I wouldn't be surprised if a few Democratic senators join us.
Yeah, well, you've got a lot of pro-growth ideas in the corporate side of this plan, no doubt about it. But where's the pro-growth in the individual side of this? I mean, that's what some people are wrangling with, Senator, because the truth is you are, in some areas, raising taxes on the people who pay taxes. So while you've got a great growth story on the corporate side, on the individual side of this tax plan, it's a little messier.
So, Maria, I think, let's be clear, the vast, overwhelming majority of individual taxpayers, families, individuals, they're going to see a tax cut.
Yes,
That's a fact. Every single income category has an aggregate tax reduction. But will there be some outliers? Yes, there will. It is always thus when you're reforming the tax code. Look, if I had my way, if I were king, I would lower marginal rates more for everybody, and that would solve this problem, and it would be pro-growth. But we had a limit to how much revenue we could forego in this exercise, and so we made the best decisions we could to be fair to working families and generate economic growth.
Senator, the two top congressional Democrats, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, pulling out of a White House meeting yesterday with President Trump. The president tweeted earlier that the meeting likely wouldn't lead to a deal to avoid a partial government shutdown. And then the president sat next to two empty chairs marked with their name cards and said this. Listen to this, Senator.
They decided not to show up. They've been all talk and they've been no action. And now it's even worse. Now it's not even talk. So they're not showing up for the meeting.
What happened? Why didn't they show up for the meeting?
Well, you'd have to ask them, but it certainly appears that they may be thinking that the politics might be good for them to try to force a government shutdown. Maybe they'd like to do that. They have in the past thought that they benefit politically, and so you'd have to ask them, but that'd be one of my concerns.
Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you joining us this morning. Senator Pat Toomey there.